Vladimir Putin will expel British diplomats from Moscow in a tit-for-tat revenge move after Theresa May announced she was kicking 23 spies out of Britain over the Skripal poisoning row. The Kremlin said retaliatory steps would happen soon, with the president likely to select the option that most suits Russia's interests. Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov condemned claims Russia was behind the assassination attempt on Sergei Skripal in Salisbury on March the 4th as absolutely boorish and unacceptable, while a ministry spokesman called the accusations insane. Speaking to MPs, Mrs May yesterday gave Russia's undeclared intelligence agents a week to leave the UK in the biggest banishment of diplomats in a generation. She also declared that UK will break off all high-level contact with the country, impose new sanctions, and could seize the lucrative London assets of Putin's cronies. This morning, Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson ratcheted up the rhetoric against Russia, accusing it of glorying in the attack on Mr Skripal, which he described as a way of scaring anyone who stood up to Putin. He said the attack was aimed at making it clear that those who defy the Russian state deserve to choke on their own 30 pieces of silver. Johnson told the BBC on Thursday there was a message in the smug, sarcastic response from Moscow after the attack on Sergei Skripal and his daughter. Johnson says the Russians want simultaneously to deny it, and yet at the same time to glory in it. Johnson says the reason they've chosen this nerve agent is to show that it's Russia, and to show people in their agencies who might think of defecting, or of supporting another way of life, of believing in an alternative set of values, that Russia will take revenge. But Putin was yesterday seen bouncing around on stage during a rally in Crimea, apparently unconcerned by a day of dramatic developments in the chemical weapon poisoning of ex-spy Sergei Skripal and his daughter, a subject he failed to mention in speeches. Last night the UN met in New York as world leaders threw their weight behind Britain, with US Ambassador to the world body Nikki Haley calling the Salisbury incident a defining moment. Mrs May, who directly condemned Putin in her statement to the Commons yesterday, said she was determined the measures would fundamentally degrade Russian intelligence capability in the UK. They have treated the use of this poison with sarcasm and disdain. There is no other conclusion other than that the Russian state was responsible for the attempted assassination of Sergei Skripal and his daughter, Mrs May said. The carefully calibrated package was widely welcomed by MPs of all political stripes, although some warned that the government must be ready to step up action again if necessary. The UK called for an urgent meeting of the UN Security Council, who met last night in the US. Nikki Haley told the council, "Let me make one thing clear from the very beginning, the United States stands in absolute solidarity with Great Britain. The United States believes that Russia is responsible for the attack on 2 people in the United Kingdom using a military-grade nerve agent. Dozens of civilians and first responders were also exposed. No two nations enjoy a stronger bond than that of the United States and the United Kingdom. Ours is truly a special relationship. When our friends in Great Britain face a challenge, the United States will always be there for them. Always, Ms. Haley said. If we don't take immediate concrete measures to address this now, Salisbury will not be the last place we see chemical weapons used. They could be used here in New York or in cities of any country that sits on this council. This is a defining moment. Britain's Deputy UN Ambassador, Jonathan Allen, has said the government is asking the International Chemical Weapons Watchdog to independently verify its analysis that a military-grade nerve agent from the former Soviet Union was used to poison Sergei and Yulia Skripal. At the meeting of the UN Security Council, he said that without any alternative explanation from Russian authorities about the nerve agent, we have no choice but to conclude this was a state-sponsored act against the prohibition and use of chemical weapons and in defiance of international law. He said the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons has been informed about the use of the nerve agent and that UN are inviting them to independently verify our analysis. He said, "We are making every effort to expedite this process." But Russia immediately threatened to hit back in kind. After being notified of the reprisals at the Foreign Office, Ambassador to the UK Alexander Yakovenko branded them a provocation and unacceptable and confirmed there would be expulsions of British diplomats. And the Russian embassy tweeted that the measures were part of a bid to punish Russia under a false pretext. It added, "We believe it is absolutely unacceptable and unworthy of the British government to seek to further seriously aggravate relations in pursuit of its unseemly political ends, having announced a whole series of hostile measures, including the expulsion of 23 Russian diplomats from the country." They added, "Needless to say, our response measures will not be long in coming." The dramatic escalation of the spat with Russia came after Mrs May outlined her plans to MPs in Parliament yesterday. Mrs May said, "Under the Vienna Convention, the United Kingdom will now expel 23 Russian diplomats who have been identified as undeclared intelligence officers. They have just 1 week to leave." This will be the single biggest expulsion in over 30 years, and it reflects the fact this is not the first time that the Russian state has acted against our country. Through these expulsions, we will fundamentally degrade Russian intelligence capability in the UK for years to come. And if they seek to rebuild it, we will prevent them from doing so. The expulsions amount to around 40% of the 58-strong contingent at the Russian embassy. And it is the biggest expulsion of Russian diplomats since 1971, when Ted Heath kicked 90 out of the country after uncovering a massive spy ring. By contrast, just 4 diplomats were expelled following the murder of Alexander Litvinenko in 2006. All high-level contacts with Russia will be frozen, with ministers and the royal family boycotting the Football World Cup in the country this summer. In an apparent reference to the activities of Russian oligarchs, Mrs May said there would be tighter checks on those coming to the country. She said there could be no place for corruption in the UK, and the authorities would freeze Russian state assets wherever we have the evidence that they may be used to threaten the life or property of UK nationals or residents. Checks on private flights and freight traffic will be stepped up to detect and track those who could endanger the security of the UK. Mrs May told MPs, led by the National Crime Agency, we will continue to bring all the capabilities of UK law enforcement to bear against serious criminals and corrupt elites. There is no place for these people or their money in our country, she went on. We will also table a government amendment to the sanctions bill to strengthen our powers to impose sanctions in response to the violation of human rights. In doing so, we will play a part in the international effort to punish those responsible for the sorts of abuses suffered by Sergei Magnitsky. Mr Magnitsky was a Russian human rights lawyer who was imprisoned after exposing corruption, beaten up in jail and eventually died in custody. Calling out Mr Putin by name, Mrs May said, "Many of us looked at a post-Soviet Russia with hope. We wanted a better relationship, and it is tragic that President Putin has chosen to act in this way. But we will not tolerate the threat to life of British people and others on British soil from the Russian government. Nor will we tolerate such a flagrant breach of Russia's international obligations." In an extraordinary series of tweets last night, the Russian embassy to London posted threatening messages accompanied by pictures of what appears to be vials of poison. But UK Ambassador Julian Braithwaite told the UN Human Rights Council in Geneva this morning that Moscow's behaviour was an affront. The Council and the United Nations General Assembly have decried Russia's violations of international law with alarming regularity, he said. Its reckless behavior is an affront to all this body stands for, a Foreign Office spokesman said. The UK has called for an urgent meeting of the UN Security Council to update council members on the investigation into the nerve agent attack in Salisbury. Mrs May received support from across the Commons when she delivered her statement yesterday afternoon. But Mr Corbyn was jeered and met with cries of shame as he failed to back the PM's tough stance. He prompted gasps of disbelief as he parroted the Russian line calling for Britain to share samples of the poison used against Mr Skripal and his daughter Yulia with Moscow to run their own tests. and he used the assassination attempt to blast government cuts to diplomats, while call for a robust dialogue with Vladimir Putin. There was fresh fury after the exchanges, when his official spokesman said MI5 could be wrong in blaming Russia because they were wrong about weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. Told of the comments, Mrs May said, "It is quite wrong and outrageous that the leader of the opposition's spokesman has made the comments in relation to this that he has. John Woodcock was among Labour backbenchers who took swipes at Mr Corbyn's response in the chamber. Mr Woodcock, a long-term critic of the veteran left-winger, said, "This is a day for the House to speak as one for the nation, and Mrs May will be reassured to hear that a clear majority of Labour MPs, alongside the leaders of every other party, support the firm stance which she is taking." Labour former Minister Pat McFadden said, "Responding with strength and resolve when your country is under threat is an essential component of political leadership." There is a Labour tradition that understands that, and it has been understood by prime ministers of all parties who have stood at that dispatch box. That means when chemical weapons are used, we need more than words, but deeds. Tory former Minister Anna Salisbury said, "It is noticeable that the length and breadth of this place has completely supported not just the wise words and the leadership of the Prime Minister, but also her firm actions." With the notable exception of the front bench of the opposition, and that is a shameful moment. Tory former Minister Mark Francois praised Mrs May's response as having flashes of the Iron Lady about it, and said it was in stark contrast to the attitude of the leader of the opposition. He branded Mr Corbyn a CND badge-wearing apologist for the Russian state. As relations between the two countries hit the lowest point since the Cold War overnight on Tuesday, Nikolai Glushkov, the right-hand man of Mr Putin's personal enemy number one, was found dead at his London home. He is said to have borne marks of strangulation.It was also claimed that Mr Skripal and his daughter might have been poisoned when the nerve agent was smeared on the door handles of their car.